Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
There's no turning back now.
Let's put on the show.
You're listening to episode number 104 of the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-host,
Brian.
So anticlimactic when there's only two of us. So we've got a lot to cover this week and some very minor news things. I think we can get through this pretty quickly. First up on our list of news topics is that the 2020 DVC Moonlight Magic dates were announced for Walt Disney World. For those of you that don't know, the Moonlight Magic stuff is the like special DVC nights that they hold where you get late night access if you're a DVC member with free refreshments and some special character meet and greet opportunities. It's kind of similar from my understanding to like the Halloween and Christmas party, but exclusively for DVC members. But it looks like Magic Kingdom, March 3rd, April 21st, April 28th, 2020, Epcot, May 4th, June 29th, and Hollywood Studios, September 15th, 22nd, and October 6th. Animal Kingdom gets January 21st, February 11th, and February 25th. This is something that I hopefully one day will attend.
Yeah, this is one of those things that, I can't take advantage of, obviously, because I'm not DVC, but, you can't even really be bitter about it. As much as it costs to be in DVC, I'm kind of surprised that they don't have more of these.
I love that they're giving DVC members stuff like this because that's just like, it's a good sign of appreciation. And I think that they're one of the few groups of people that they feel like Disney has not appreciated them the right way.
Yeah, it's not only, it's such a commitment, just the money, first of all, but also, like, you have to do it for so long for it to eventually be worth it. So, yeah, I'm completely cool with this.
Absolutely. And it looks like next thing on our list of news topics is that Star Tours is to receive the Rise of the Skywalker scenes on December 20th at all of the Disney parks around the world. I guess we kind of saw this coming because it happens every time there's a new Star Wars movie.
Yeah, this is the one good thing about screen-based attractions is they're super easy to update, and especially one like this that's based around a series of movies. You always know that there's going to be some refresh when new stuff comes out, so that's cool. And also with the trailer that I'm sure you got to watch, the landscapes and all the settings look really, really interesting from the trailer. So I think this will make for a good update for the ride. Oh,
I am so excited for this new movie. And like, I really love that they have the opportunity to do that with Star Tours, where they're like, hey, a new movie's coming out. Let's just update this part of the attraction so that we get the scenes from the movie. Like, that just makes it so much better. And I think it gives it more of a rewrite ability. So I'm super excited about that.
Yep.
And then last piece of news that we've got to cover this week, it looks like the first, I guess, kind of phase of Epcot's revitalization has been complete. They've opened the entrance area with what looks like some, they groomed out some of the trees. They did some repainting. It looks good. I'm really happy that this is like something they did. This is not a very like easy thing to talk about because there's not much much done to it besides like some painting and some like landscaping, but it looks really good.
No, and this is kind of a minor touch, obviously, like where the tram is coming now, the new location is kind of nice. I always thought it was a little bit messy getting into Epcot before, so I'm hoping this whole revamp will kind of clean that up.
Oh, yeah. And I like that Spaceship Earth looks a lot more visible from that walking area than it did before, which is nice because, like, I know we've talked about how the sightline in Magic Kingdom is, like, the best part of walking into Magic Kingdom, but this is This is good. I like that.
Yeah.
So that's it for news this week. Just in the housekeeping, we wanted to mention again, we launched our Patreon this last week. If you want to support the show, anything that you donate is going to go directly towards basically keeping the lights on here, helping us further all of the goals that we have for the show. So patreon.com/station71 podcast. There's a couple different tiers with a couple different rewards that you can claim over there. And that'll probably, hopefully, maybe be one of the last few times that I mention this, because I really don't want to turn that into like an ad segment every week. So this week I wanted to take a look at some plans that were set in place for an EPCOT overhaul back in like 2006 that we never got. And maybe kind of talk about what this means for EPCOT's future, because some of this stuff may seem a little familiar. But for those of you that may have done some digging around the internet, the code name that this project went under was called Project Gemini, and we'll touch a lot on that later. But first, I want to dive into some history of EPCOT. This may take a while, and a lot of it may sound familiar, so I'm going to call back to some of our shows that we've done before, because while I was doing research for this, I was like, we talked about this already. We've kind of been building to this. And it's kind of funny that we've never talked about like history of EPCOT.
Yeah, it's always kind of been in passing or in relation to something else. It's never been really focused on EPCOT itself.
Yeah, and what's really weird about this is like I know a lot of people have like talk about like Walt saying he wanted it to be like an experimental prototype, Community of Tomorrow and all that stuff, and like how he wanted it to be basically a living city. But obviously that's not what we ended up with. Unfortunately, after Walt's passing and like Disney World's success had, taken off and they were looking into building a second park, Imagineers knew that they weren't going to be able to build his original vision, which kind of looking at it today, I don't think that would have worked out at all.
I don't either.
Yeah, it's so grand and crazy. I mean, if anybody could have done it, Walt Disney would have been the man, but without his leadership, Imagineering would have had no chance at making it work. But ultimately what they ended up settling on was making it a World's Fair that never ended. And like we talked about in our World's Fair episode, the World's Fair, specifically the one in 1964 to 65, was really important to the Disney company as a whole, and we probably wouldn't have the parks without that. But just a little bit of background on World's Fairs. They were basically international exhibits where countries would come together, build these massive they would build these massive pavilions and showcase some technology or like internal cooperation like things. Namely, the one in 2015 in Milan showcased a lot of their coming together with their country's innovations, cuisine, and culture. So you can kind of already see that in like the idea behind EPCOT. But with, like we said before, without the World's Fair, probably wouldn't have the Disney parks. And the specific attractions that came out of those: General Electric sponsored Carousel of Progress, the state of Illinois sponsored Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Pepsi Cola sponsored It's a Small World, and the Ford Motor Company sponsored the Magic Skyway. Oh, okay. All of that out of the way because that's stuff we've already talked about. When it came to designing EPCOT, there's this like urban legend that two different competing Imagineering fractions couldn't quite settle on an idea for the permanent World's Fair and how they wanted it to take place. So one of them wanted it to be like the technology side of it, and the other side wanted to be the cultural side of it. And eventually the two models that they had built got pushed together and made this figure eight shape that essentially is what EPCOT is now. And I love that story because it sounds so silly, but so plausible with how EPCOT is.
It's almost too perfect.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, I look at it, I'm like, okay, that definitely probably could have happened. But to make EPCOT be a reality, the biggest thing that it was going to be hinging on was sponsorships, which again, we talked about in another episode. Disney would make it a reality only through having these corporate sponsorships that would essentially provide money for updates on attractions, the upkeep, building new attractions, and basically keeping it in business. The other part of EPCOT, which would be World Showcase, would basically be sponsored by countries or private companies within the countries, and would be staffed through citizens that would come over and work from those specific places, which may have been its biggest downfall. I don't know if we talked about them specifically in our sponsorship episode, but the original sponsors for Future World were Universe of Energy was sponsored by Exxon, Wonders of Life was sponsored by MetLife, World of Motion was sponsored by General Motors, Communicore would have independently sponsored exhibits. So inside of Communicore, each little section would have its own unique sponsorships that would bring something to the table for that. Imagination was sponsored by Kodak, The Landcraft, The Living Seas, United Technologies, Spaceship Earth, AT&T, and Horizons was sponsored by General Electric.
A lot of sponsorships.
Lots of sponsorships. And that would be the only way that this would work, because it was such an ambitious park to launch and such a big idea that Disney probably wouldn't have been able to fund it all by itself. And with this sponsorship idea in place, they would, like I said, work on the upkeep, and most importantly, they would have to update it every so many years. And of course, no sponsoring company would want their name splashed across an outdated retro-futuristic exhibit, and they wanted to put the best product in front of those customers. So theoretically, this is a win-win situation for Disney, except when it wasn't. Unfortunately, a lot of those sponsorships fell through, and it all kind of starts with Horizons, which a lot of Disney fans know the story of that. In 1993, the dark ride would lose its sponsorship, and it would go a couple years without upkeep before ultimately going dark in 1999. Following that, the land would lose its Nestle sponsorship, or it would lose its sponsorship from Kraft Foods and be picked up by Nestle, who would kind of give it some upgrades, which Food Rocks was the only thing that they really did with it. In that time span, MetLife would drop the Wonders of Life in 2001, which would close in 2004, and that pavilion sat empty for how many years now?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And then Kodak, I think maybe we've talked about Journey into Imagination before, but that's another big story that a lot of Disney fans know. The budget on that was razor thin because Kodak was already pretty much going under when they needed to revamp it. And Disney wasn't putting money in because this whole sponsorship model was how it was supposed to work. And unfortunately, we got an iteration of the attraction that closed half of it, didn't build in its place, and then ended up being probably one of the most hated updates that Disney's ever done. And finally, Universe of Energy would begin dating itself long before Exxon bailed in 2004. So that leaves a lot of these pavilions in Epcot pretty empty.
You know, it still boggles my mind today to think about this. I mean, even at this point, Disney is such a huge media company, but with something like this, you still see how reliant they are on other companies and the corporate sponsorships.
And what's crazy about that too is that kind of segues into my next point that I really want to make here. At this point, technology is changing so fast. We have knowledge at our fingertips. Pretty much anybody can look up the information about, Exxon and really see all of the information that's out there about the company as a whole, and we can form our own opinions. We don't need Disney to put that attraction in front of us and say, hey, here's someone from Exxon telling you about energy and why it's important. And at the same time, we as people, like I said, can form our own opinions on it. And for that matter, do we really want companies telling us about these ideas?
That's a good point. And I mean, then that almost reflects back on Disney, especially in a case like that where, now Disney's the one housing the attraction. So if we get something like Exxon telling us about energy when, they've made a, huge screw up lately, then that kind of leaves a bad taste in our mouth while we're at Disney on these attractions. And it just, it shows the issues of tying two companies together with these corporate sponsorships.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing about it is, I think Epcot's whole thesis was about technology and the wonders of what we can do and intervention and all that. And unfortunately, I think that's its biggest downfall, aside from the sponsorships. Like, technology would put it so that we can form these opinions about companies. And, you know, the next point that I have on here is that basically Kodak was a huge sponsor for Journey into Imagination and the photo spots throughout the park. I mean, I remember when they had the signs that had the Kodak Photo Pass things everywhere. But unfortunately, Kodak went bankrupt, and shareholders were kind of wondering like if they were going to be able to continue sponsoring parts of the park. So with like film aging so fast and, you know, digital technology being the new normal, like Kodak didn't have anything to keep up with. So I think unfortunately that like technology that made EPCOT so great is also what really hurt it in the end. Mm-hmm. But with all that said, Imagineers knew that they needed to kind of come up with something to save EPCOT. And with the bailing sponsorships and everything, Disney was kind of thinking that they were going to do their own thing and, you know, make this big project their own. The name Gemini comes from the two separate halves of the park, which Gemini would feature mostly future world and would bring it into the 21st century. So let's take a look at some of the plans for that now that we've gone through the history of EPCOT pretty quick. But first things first, let's talk about how a thing that I didn't put on here. EPCOT's theme would go from being the educational park to the park of discovery, which would kind of solve the Tomorrowland problem that we've talked about a few times, where, you know, you build this idea of, hey, tomorrow's right around the corner and these are the cool things that we're going to be working on, but then in a few years you have to update it. So 2006 is where we're going to start painting this picture. And for the last 3 years, EPCOT's been behind construction walls, which should sound kind of like the climate we're about to head into. And as you're walking into EPCOT, things should start to kind of look familiar, but just slightly different enough that, you know, you would know that this is a new park. First thing that you're going to notice is that the iconic spaceship Earth has gone from being this stark white that would blend in with like the concrete jungle of Future World to being this gold icon. And if anybody's ever looked up the concept art for Westcott, which was the planned second gate over in California, it should look pretty similar to that. And alongside of that, it's not going to just have this big white geodesic sphere that it has already. It's going to be more in tune with the American Pavilion Expo from the 67 World's Fair, which I want you to click on that really quick and take a look at that and tell me that that doesn't look like Spaceship Earth.
Oh, goodness. Extremely similar.
It's like an open concept Spaceship Earth where you could see inside of it. It looks so cool and like so crazy. So you'd also notice that along the northern leg of Spaceship Earth, it would split and it would have like this show building, which would kind of house rotating shows that would go on throughout the park's history. Nothing that I could find would have specific details on like what exactly was supposed to go here. But you would have to pass through the other side to get there. Now, I'm going to skip down a little bit because I feel like we're right here. We should probably talk about this. Spaceship Earth was going to be gutted, and they were going to install a new attraction called Time Racers. It would take guests on a high-speed adventure through time using physical sets and time-lapse photography. The ride would also feature a thrilling finale where the vehicles would race out of the sphere, lap around its circumference before driving back into the new show building. So basically they were going to gut Spaceship Earth and put a semi-roller coaster test track thing in there.
I'm very glad this didn't happen.
There's some stuff in here that I'm like, why didn't this happen? And then there's a lot of stuff in here that it's like, all right, I can see why they'd want to do that, but please don't. And you got to remember, too, that Spaceship Earth was also largely unchanged for most of its history. So adding a thrill ride in there, which during the Eisner era, we've talked about this before, like that was the thing that he was pretty famous for, was wanting to make the parks more thrilling. And this shouldn't be surprising at all. But the winding path around Spaceship Earth would lead to like a forested area, which should also sound very familiar. And the Fountain of Nations would be still intact, which rest in peace. But the pavilions that would be in Inventions would actually be split up into 6 different buildings and wouldn't be like the long haul corridors that they were. It looks like they would have had a smaller version of Inventions called Leading Edge, which would continue to show rotating innovative technologies. To the south, we would have an unnamed robot restaurant that would feature like standard park food, but there would be like BattleBot type performances, which is interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. One piece of the former Inventions building would be recast as what was called Home of the Future, and it would showcase like advanced technologies. The one rumor that I found that I could only find like in 2 spots was that during this time they were also talking about getting rid of Carousel of Progress, and they were going to move the animatronics here to showcase the new and upcoming like innovations, which is interesting. And I'm really happy they didn't close Carousel of Progress.
Oh yeah, same. You know, it's so funny to me that you mentioned this, because I feel like Disney has tried so hard to do this Home of the Future thing repeatedly, and it doesn't often work out very well.
I feel like all of this stuff sounds great, but then there's like the whole Tomorrowland problem where it's like, okay, yeah,
exactly.
You do this, but that technology gets so out of date so fast.
Right, and it's like, other than Horizons, I feel like when they do that in other attractions, it's quickly dated and then hated. So I don't know. I feel like they need to just kind of not do that anymore, or commit themselves to updating it very frequently.
Yeah, exactly. I also sent you the concept art for this too, so you can kind of follow along with it.
Okay, cool.
I realized I didn't put that in there, so I'll try to drop that in the show notes if I remember to do that. But the next 2 things on here I think are my favorite. There was also an internet cafe, which on the concept art is just internet cafe. And obviously, like, that's what it would have been, but you don't see those anywhere. So again, that would have dated really fast. And then the next thing on here is called Cool Stuff, which I cannot find any details on what that was supposed to be. So let's take a look at the east side of the new Discovery Land, which would be all about industry and the way of the future. So exiting straight from the Central Plaza, you'd enter the other side of Discovery Land, which would feature geometric paths, straight lines, 90-degree angles, kind of like the old Future World. But that would just be to segregate it into like the different sections to talk about energy, health, space, and transportation. So the hard sciences would be what this was all about. Complete replacement for the Wonders of Life Pavilion was set in place, and it came in the plans came to light in 2003. The Wonders of Life Pavilion would still open, and MetLife would have been dropped at this point. But it doesn't look like the plans were exactly like super clear on what it was going to be. But the final thing was that it was definitely going to be health and medicine related. It just says on the concept art that it would be set for a future expansion. So not too much was clear about that one. The next thing that we did get was actually Mission Space. This was a part of the actual installment of Project Gemini, but it was already under construction at this point, so they couldn't really scrap it when everything kind of went under. And it would be the first thing to build up. And lastly on here, they were going to add a Disneyland favorite and put a Junior Autopia right by Test Track. So anyone that couldn't ride Test Track would have a motor-based attraction to ride. All of this stuff seems like very bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I get that Epcot and Future World's always been kind of a different pavilions to showcase different things, and because of that you can do a lot of different stuff, but this does seem kind of like a messy hodgepodge.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, of all of those things that popped up, Ellen's Energy Adventure was not touched. That was supposed to stay exactly how it was, and I think that was the one that at the time really just needed it. But this one should kind of be a little bit more interesting to you. The west side of it, and I think this is the one that actually caught my attention the most, was supposed to focus on life. So kind of how it is now, it would stay the same themes. And it looks like this one would be more like winding paths over bridges, or bridges over streams, and interactive displays. So kind of what it sounds like we're headed towards. The cool thing about this was that the first thing that popped up was the Living Seas Pavilion was actually supposed to become Under the Sea, which was the ride that we got in Magic Kingdom. Basically, it was The Little Mermaid, but it would be more thought to teaching guests about the ocean, kind of how Nemo is now, which is interesting. And I don't know how I feel about the Little Mermaid or being the highlight of that attraction over Nemo.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Nemo ride at the Living Seas Pavilion, but at the same time, I feel like it's less distracting than the Little Mermaid would have been from, what that pavilion is supposed to be. It's supposed to be educational, and at its heart, it's, a working aquarium. And I want as little of that taken away as possible. So I don't think I would have been very happy with that.
Well, speaking of things that kind of take away from the theme of the land pavilion itself would actually be the hub of this section of the park. And you would already kind of notice from the exterior that something was different, because they pruned down the palm trees and they fixed the dated flooring at the time, which I looked it up, and apparently the land had some very dated carpet up until this expansion. And it would have a lot of change coming to it. The first thing would be an inverted canopy coaster, kind of like Big Thunder Mountain.
Oh, wow.
I can't go through this without laughing because it's just so funny. And it would zoom through the trees at like a thrilling speed and use lift hills to provide immersion and somehow teach about the land. Like, that's the thing that I still cannot find information about, is how this was going to teach guests about the area.
I don't think you can do much teaching on a roller coaster.
Nope. But the only thing that we actually did get out of this was Soarin', because at the time we didn't have that attraction. They were actually going to build 2 queues tied to the land, not in the actual land pavilion, and they were going to like basically do what they do now. For better or worse, I think the Soarin' that we got at the time was definitely a much more improved way of doing that. I don't think we needed Kitchen Cabaret or Food Rocks anymore. But then the other interesting thing that was added here was that between the land and Imagination pavilions was a hedge maze, which if you kind of look at the EPCOT plans that we got from 2017, it kind of looks like there is maybe a hedge maze somewhere in there. Maybe that's coming back. That would be interesting. And then no plans for Imagination, so maybe Figment was just going to limp on and hope that something happened to him down the line.
As he's been doing.
Yeah, pretty much. So how do you feel about all of these plans so far?
You're right, the like kind of more living natural side, the west end of Future World definitely sounds a lot cooler. Maybe it's just because there's a lot of things that we didn't get. Like I said, I don't know how I would have felt about the specifics of having the Little Mermaid or having a roller coaster in the land pavilion, but it seems like they were kind of trying to do more on the west side. Yeah,
and that's the funny thing is there's a lot of stuff to the plan specifically that looking at it, it's like, this is very bizarre, and why did they think that this would work? But my favorite part of this, though, is what looks like we're getting. I mean, that's the forested concept of like having more greenery to the park and changing one like sections to be about specific things instead of like the whole front of the park is Future World. Like I think breaking it down into lands and doing the greenery and the open concepts and stuff, that looks really cool. And I think that can kind of provide some insight to where maybe Epcot's headed. But
and that's always the cool thing to me. Anytime we go back and do these history episodes, it always feels like Disney never throws a plan away. They always keep it in their back pocket. And it's really cool because we're kind of in the middle of that right now.
Yeah, I really want to know, like, when Epcot's settled and everything's done with it, like, how much of this can we compare the two pieces of, like, current park map and then this concept art and the concept art that we got at, last year's D23? Like, how much of that can we look at and say, like, oh, I know where this came from. This came from this piece of information. Like, that's going to be so cool to me just from that perspective.
Oh, definitely.
So last thing that you can't see on here, while most of the plans for Project Gemini focused on Future World, there were 2 plans that were supposed to pop up for World Showcase that are very, very bizarre, and should not surprise anyone, honestly. Looks like for a while Switzerland had been rumored to appear as the new pavilion between the Germany and Italy pavilion. And of course, tied to that was a 192-foot recreation of the Matterhorn, complete with a Matterhorn bobsled coaster.
As much as I would love for there to be a Matterhorn on the East Coast because I've always wanted to ride it, this seems kind of shoehorned and forced into Epcot.
Oh, if you want shoehorned and forced, boy, do I have another thing to tell you about. Alongside of that, the Japan Pavilion would also receive a Mount Fuji roller coaster, which would basically be a clone of Expedition Everest, except instead of chasing the Yeti, we're chasing 2 guardian dragons. Yeah.
Man, I need to look at an overhead shot of World Showcase because I don't even see where they could think of putting something like that in. There doesn't seem like there's anywhere near that much space.
Yeah, no, I don't think that would have been a thing that they could have feasibly done in Epcot. And there was also supposedly like a bullet train simulator planned at one point. It's kind of unclear if that was part of this thing.
I don't know. I thought the whole point with the bullet train is like it's like super fast but super smooth. That seems like a really boring ride if that was supposed to be like that.
But we don't know if that's like part of the plans for this revamp or if that was something else. That is just something that I like every time I looked for this, I would find it like next to the Mount Fuji attraction. So maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Who knows? So while we know that didn't happen, there were a couple things that did happen, which we kind of touched on a little bit. First thing was that Disney actually started marketing Epcot as a discovery park rather than the educational park. So everything that came out of it was less about learning and more about discovering. And that was a lot of their marketing at the time too. And along with that, we talked about this. Nestle renewed their sponsorship and they did the exterior updates and interior updates to the pavilion, but added the Soarin' Over California to the pavilion itself instead of building it outside like they had planned. And of course, the big 2 here would be that The Little Mermaid never actually saw the Seas expansion that they thought they were going to do, especially because Nemo was a huge box office success and it was just way easier for them to tie in there. And of course, Mission Space, which had already been under construction, opened and would receive a very lukewarm reception. So, yeah, lots of stuff did come out of this. But before we talk about anything future timelines or anything, related to this, I kind of wanted to touch on why it didn't happen, because this is really interesting to me. Apparently, even though this was a super ambitious revamp, and it could have been potentially the biggest thing that happened to Epcot up until this point, it all came down to money, which shouldn't really be much of a surprise. the projected cost was estimated around $500 million, which compared to Mission Space, which cost $100 million, isn't that bad, but still is a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And I also did not know that Mission Space cost that much money, because that's a lot of money.
That's an insane amount of money.
Oh yeah. But what's interesting about this is that Imagineering pitched it to the executives, and Paul Pressler, who is one of the executives for the Disney parks at the time, said it was too big, too expensive, and got shot it down. So as soon as he left office, they passed it to Jay Rasulo, who took over for him, and he saw it as the perfect project to fix Future World. Unfortunately, when it got to Michael Eisner, he shot it down because he wasn't ready to spend that much money, which, again, shouldn't be surprised. We talked about Michael Eisner and his singles and doubles.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and then I kind of wanted to end this with the thought that, like, we talked about kind of already on here. There's a lot of stuff in here that maybe, with the theme of Discovery taking control of Epcot, maybe we could blue sky some stuff out of this and see how we're headed towards the future of Epcot, and see if there's anything that we can maybe pull out of here that might still work. So my thoughts here, I guess kind of blue skying Epcot the way that it is, I think breaking the Innoventions pavilions up into smaller chunks would have been the right idea, which we're kind of seeing, I think, now with them taking the plaza out and then putting like the Journey of Water in where one section was, and like all that stuff. I think that's the right idea, because it opens up the central hub of Future World and makes it like more open, and more greenery is never going to be a bad idea.
Right.
I think the thrill aspect of Epcot was never going to work, which
No.
maybe we'll see that with the Guardians of the Galaxy roller coaster. I don't know how they're going to make that educational, but I don't know. The more I look at this, the more I realize that Epcot, while Discovery is a good way to focus it and make it less dated, over time, I think this thrill aspect of it is not the way to do that.
Yeah. That's just not really... When I think of Epcot, that's not what I think of Epcot. And the funny thing is, though, is that, for the majority of my life when I've been there has been some thrill elements to it. But that's still not what I think of when I think of Epcot.
So, question for you, because I know we've had kind of this conversation before a little bit. When you go to Epcot, what is your primary focus? Because I know for me, usually it's World Showcase, and it's not like a drinking around the world kind of thing. It's more just to kind of explore World Showcase.
Oh yeah, that's a lot for me too. I would agree. We ride. Let's see. I'm trying to think just what our usual go-tos are. I mean, we do Living with the Land for sure. That's in almost every time we go, and a lot of it really is just walking around World Showcase and touring it. And that's what I love about Epcot, is that that's kind of our go-to relaxing park. There's a lot to just kind of meander around, figure out what we want to do, what we want to look at, go to World Showcase, see if we want to spend more time in one of the countries, maybe stumble upon one of the shows that's going on, the live acts or something that's going on there. And that's what I really like about it so much.
See, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it too. Like, I was thinking about this when we came home from our last trip. We didn't do Test Track. We didn't do like a lot of the big things. I mean, I guess we tour differently than the average person does, but still, like, thinking about it from that perspective, I think Epcot staying as the park that's not the big thrill rides and stuff is probably the right move.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that, lately I have kind of seen that I don't like the direction that the parks are heading, is that, all four of them really offer very, very unique things and very unique experiences. And not just in the individual experiences that you get to do with the park, but kind of just how the overall experience of the park is. And I see a lot more that it's like they're kind of trying to fit more of the same into each park, which I don't want to see that. I like how different Magic Kingdom and Epcot and Animal Kingdom and Hollywood Studios are from each other. Because it's not just like, I don't think I'm going to Disney this weekend. I think I'm going to a specific park. So I don't want to see that go away.
Yeah, and I totally have to agree with you on that. I had this conversation with someone over like a Facebook group or something where they had asked the question if like calling our Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom takes away from Disneyland Park being like the original Magic Kingdom. And while I thought about that, I was like, coming from a different perspective, like if you tell someone I'm going to Walt Disney World, that's more of a broad statement, or like I'm going to Disneyland. The assumption is usually the Magic Kingdom, no matter which one you're thinking. But if like, you specifically being a local say, oh, I think I'm going to Hollywood Studios this weekend. It's not like, it's a different experience. And that's what's so fascinating to me is that like you go to these parks and you can have a different experience based on what park you go to. And that's what's cool is that it's not just like, or it hasn't been, I guess it's more leaning that way now. Like, you don't go to Disney and you can't, well, you used to not be able to stumble into a character every 5 feet. And that's fascinating to me, I think. I don't know. I do want to see them stick with that, but I don't think that that's going to be a thing that we're going to get.
Right. And, and I'm not completely 100% saying like, Epcot should have no thrill rides or anything like that. I just want the overall experience of being able to go there and learn something and kind of just explore and be immersed in these different cultures to be there. I don't want that to go away. If they can do that while incorporating more thrilling rides, then I'm all for it. But I just don't want to see the overall of what Epcot is and kind of what it means to me go away.
And I mean, I'm going to get a little bit of flack for this, but I think that the two thrill rides that we have right now, Mission Space and Test Track, are both pretty solid examples of that. I think that they both, even though they have like Test Track I usually don't go on because the wait time is usually way outside of my limit of like, I want to wait in a line for that. But like the two of them at least have some sense of like learning to them. And
right.
While Test Track has kind of gotten a little bit more watered down over time, I think that both of them as examples of like, this is the direction that we're headed, I'm fine with that. The thing that worries me the most about, the Energy Pavilion having the Guardians of the Galaxy coaster is like they keep saying, oh, we're still going to incorporate that, but it's a roller coaster. And like you said before about like the Rainforest coaster, how much can they do with that? Are they just going to shoehorn it in the pre-show, which I guess Test Track kind of did, and it did work out a little bit, but I don't know. There's too many things that tie that to me, like wondering if it's going to actually stay the same.
Right.
I am glad, though, that we did not see the Future World updates, or not the Future World, the World Showcase updates, because I think those specifically would have very much cheapened the Epcot experience.
Yeah, people were already so up in arms about Frozen, and I don't know. I can see it going one way or the other. I think, maybe if they brought the Matterhorn over, that it wouldn't have caught as much flack just because of what a classic Disney attraction it is. But at the same time, you got to take a step back and look and realize that like that's kind of even more distracting from the point of World Showcase than Frozen is right now, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. I think I still don't have a problem with characters in World Showcase, even though that kind of contradicts what I just said a couple minutes ago. I think as long as it doesn't take too much away from the park. Like, Maelstrom was dated enough that I can say, for me specifically, like, I loved the ride. That was one that we did almost every time that we were there. But at the same time, like, what did that teach me about Norway?
Not a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't teach any more than Frozen does, I don't think.
Right. And yeah, especially if they would have done the Mount Fuji one too. I feel like having two huge e-ticket attractions, and call it what you want, but like I don't, you know, 5 years from now, I don't think Frozen Ever After is going to be considered an e-ticket attraction. But obviously, two roller coasters in World Showcase would have been, and I just feel like that would completely mess up like the flow and the being able to just kind of meander your way through World Showcase. So I'm definitely glad that that didn't happen.
Oh, yeah.
Still love to see the Matterhorn somewhere else, though.
That brings the question, where would we put the Matterhorn?
I mean, that's a good question. Unless Animal Kingdom did some kind of expansion into Europe, which I don't know what else they'd be able to put in a European land for Animal Kingdom. I don't know. You know, when they originally wanted to put it into Fantasyland, that would have kind of made sense, and now there's definitely no way they're going to be able to put it in there now.
Yeah, I feel like there's not much room in Magic Kingdom for the Matterhorn, so that's kind of out. I think you're right. Animal Kingdom would probably be the best.
I think that they could take... Well, honestly, though, could you imagine having, like, the Matterhorn and Expedition Everest in the same park? You know, people would... Especially people that aren't big Disney fans that don't know about the Matterhorn in Disneyland would think that, oh, that's just like they took the same thing and they made a slightly different ride from it.
Yeah, that's true. Especially with the whole like Yeti Abominable Snowman thing. Like they're very similar in concept and story.
I think they'd have to do a pretty major retheming of it, but maybe kind of keep the same bobsled type system. I don't know. I don't think we'll ever get the Matterhorn. I'm just gonna have to go over to Disneyland.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're gonna have to go to Disneyland and see what happens there and see if it's any better than Expedition Everest. But yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much all I've got in terms of like what I could blue sky for Epcot. If you have any ideas, by all means, take the floor.
I don't know. I would love to see kind of Innoventions get a decent chunk of funding so that there would be more really hands-on stuff to do at Epcot, because I really, really enjoy that kind of stuff.
That would be cool. I could see that.
I don't know what exactly specifically I would want to put in there, but, you know, again, that just kind of goes back to what Epcot is to me. What I think it is to a lot of guests is that being able to learn something while you're there, and especially if you're able to do something that's interactive and hands-on and you're actually a part of it while you're learning, you're really going to learn something. So I would love to see a big expansion of funding to Innoventions.
Do you think that they could do it in a way that the technology in Innoventions wouldn't get as dated as quickly as it has been?
Well, that's the thing really, is that I think part of that funding that you're putting into it is your willingness to continually update it and continually improve it. You know, I think you have to sit down and think, yeah, each one of these attractions or whatever you want to call the experiences that you're putting in there has to last for, 2 to 3 years tops, and you're going to have to cycle it out. It's the way that, that technology is going nowadays.
Yeah, and that's like a very fine line to walk with something like that, because you can do stuff like that, but then the sponsor is ultimately responsible for a lot of money.
True. But, I wouldn't even mind seeing it. I hate to say this because I don't think anybody's a huge fan of the corporate sponsorships coming into the parks because of what we've seen happen with some of them. But even if it was like, different technology companies that were on the cutting edge of stuff that were just coming in there and displaying their products and what they had to offer. But if they did it in a cool, hands-on way, like I would even be okay with that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that isn't that like what Interventions was originally?
Right, but it kind of has strayed a good bit from that.
Yeah. I think when it was Communicore, that was when it was more of the hands-on stuff. And Interventions was too, but Interventions ended up being more like they tried to move it away from the technology aspect, I think. Like it seemed more I don't know what the word is for that, but it was more like real life practical stuff than like this is the newest in the technology that's tying to the pavilions that are adjacent to the section in Communicore we're in.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really good idea. I like that idea. I think if they did something similar, they could probably do. I don't know where that train of thought went. I just had it and I lost it.
It left the station.
Yep, it was right there and then it was gone. The one thing that I do want them to do, though, and they are kind of headed this way now, I hope that with them adding more characters to EPCOT, it ends up being more of a way to draw people in. And this is going to sound very controversial to the popular opinion, but I think that by giving kids a like a face that they know to bring them into something, it's more enticing than saying, "Hey kids, why don't you come in and learn about this this pavilion about the water cycle?" And like, no, don't do that because no kid is going to want to learn about that. Instead, put Moana there, give them the like the learning experience that we all kind of know with EPCOT, but you can also tie it to a character that they know. And I think that's the only way that that's going to work going forward.
Right. And again, it's back to, it's not, IPs getting shoehorned into EPCOT. I don't think anybody really has a problem with that. I mean, has a problem with it if you don't, if you don't shoehorn them in there. It's if you're using them correctly to kind of inspire and continue the idea that EPCOT has always been. Like, you have to use it properly, just like anything you put into the park.
And I say all that to say, give me a robotics pavilion based off of Big Hero 6.
That's a good one.
But yeah, are there any other like pavilions you think you could tie, like, or not even pavilions, but any IPs that you think you could tie to like inspire something specific?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, Big Hero 6 is a good one, and as we've talked about, and many other people online have suggested, Inside Out opens up a huge opportunity, I think, for a fun, interactive, and educational pavilion.
Weirdly enough, I think I gotta derail you for a second. I'm sorry. Inside Out would have been a good pavilion to put, or a good thing to put in Wonders of Life. And I know that was kind of talked about a lot online too, but like we live in an age where mental health is so important, and putting Inside Out in there would just open the door for that conversation a little bit more, I think.
Yep. Very good point.
Anyway, continue with your thought.
As far as IPs, I can't think of any others, but I did, while you were talking, have an idea for, I don't know, it's not even really an original idea, but I would love for them to have not even necessarily an entire pavilion, but maybe a small section a la One Man's Dream that looked kind of specifically and went over the original plan for EPCOT and had dioramas and scale models of the plans and everything. I would love that so much.
That would be awesome. And it makes me think, question for you. Would you take the EPCOT pavilion out of the People Mover just to place it in that pavilion?
I would, actually, because I love that it's there, but I kind of hate that it's there at the same time because it's everybody sees it in passing so briefly, and it's something that does not need to be seen in passing. It's such a cool bit of history, and it's such a cool, intricate model that they made. And I hate that it's like literally like flash before your eyes. I want to sit there.
Yeah,
exactly. Yes, I would be completely fine with them taking it out of there if it moved to, even if they moved it to One Man's Dream or God, Walt Disney Presents now in Hollywood Studios. I would be more okay with that than it sitting there because I don't feel like it gets appreciated.
Yeah. All right, I have one more that I just thought of while you were talking about that. There's two possibilities for this, and I think one would go over a lot better than the other. So let me tell you the one that I know isn't going to go over very well. Let's put Wally in the land pavilion. Talk about like
I'm with you.
Environmental control and some of the stuff. Like Wally has that sense to it. I think that the land can kind of function without an IP to it, so that's fine. Let's not go there fully. My other option is let's get rid of Mission Space and put Wally over there.
Okay.
I don't have any thoughts for that, but give me Wally and Epcot.
Wally needs to be somewhere in the parks. He is very noticeably lacking. But, honestly, I think I'd rather him be in the land pavilion because that was kind of the point of the movie,
Yeah.
Like, I feel like ripping Mission Space out and just putting some type of Wally attraction over there is kind of back to just shoehorning an IP in there because there needs to be an IP. Like, I would love to see him in the land, and I don't know what you would do with it, but that fits in with what the movie was supposed to teach us.
My only reason that I don't think that I want him over there is because that would kill either Soarin', which like at this point, give or take, I think on Soarin' Around the World, or Living with the Land, which got Living with the Land and I riot. Like I will chain myself to the Living with the Land boats.
I could, maybe this is blasphemous, but I could even, I don't know if I want to say this or not. I could be okay with them revamping the first part of Living with the Land and having it Wally themed as long as we kept the second half with the greenhouses.
Okay, I can see that. I think if they did it in a way that maybe was more I don't want to say like Ellen's Energy Adventure rather than Nemo, if that makes sense. Like Ellen's Energy Adventure at least kind of touched on the ideas of energy while still trying to be fun and wacky, and it really wasn't. But give me something like that where it's more themed to the idea of protecting the environment, but still with the familiar characters that we know. I think the biggest problem I have with Nemo that I've said on here before is that it's too long and too much of like, we put these characters in the seas because they're fish.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think that's one of my biggest issues with that attraction is that I don't know. I just feel like there's no point to it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't necessarily hate it. It's not a terrible attraction, but I don't understand what it adds to the pavilion at all. It's a slower way to get into the pavilion. That's it.
I still want to know, and no one has sent us this email. Is it mandatory to do that? Because I feel like I said that thinking that like that's the only way you can get in, and you guys were like, no, you can go through the gift shop.
It depends on how you define mandatory, because I can tell you that I have not been on it in years, and I go to the Sea Pavilion almost every time I go to Epcot.
I am very upset because the last time we went, I was like, I really want to go in the Sea Pavilion, and Andy was like, well, we can just ride Nemo. It's fine. We'll do it. And I was like, but I really don't want to sit through that. So we did it anyway because I wanted to go in, and then we got off and I was like, thank God I'm in the Sea Pavilion. I don't want to do that anymore.
But that's kind of the issue is that I don't think that's an accident. They want people to think that that's how you have to get in there. And I hate that, not only because it takes a long time and I don't particularly like Nemo and Friends, but is the fact that the whole Sea Pavilion then kind of feels like the exit gift shop of the ride. And it's so much more than that.
Yeah, I don't know. If anyone is going to Epcot soon, please send us an email or like tell us somewhere if that's the only way to get into the seas, because I feel like that's the direct way that Disney wants you to go in there. But you guys may be right. The doors probably do open through the gift shop.
Well, I'm actually going to Food and Wine this weekend, so I will actually try to scope it out and see if I have been sneaking in this whole time.
If you do, please tell me, because I need to know. But on that note, is there anything you want to talk about before we wrap up this week?
No, I think that does it. This was a really, really interesting kind of look at what could have been and what actually is going to be with Epcot.
I think in researching this, it made me a little bit more nervous for Epcot's future, but also excited. So hopefully that does that for someone else out there. Then that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of the Station 71 podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. For full show notes and other Disney content, you can find us on our website at station71podcast.com, Twitter at station71pod, facebook.com/station71pod, and Instagram at station71podcast. Be sure to join our Discord channel for some more in-depth Disney discussion at bit.ly/s71chat. We hope you enjoyed your ride, and we'll see you real soon.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.